Welcome to the Black Lodge Games podcast. I'm Matt, and with me as always is Nick. Today we're going to be talking about everything related to dice rolling in tabletop RPGs. What you're doing wrong and what you should never do. So why don't you start us off, Nick?
Yeah, interfacing with the mechanics is really the paramount way that any drama or cinematic aspect or roleplay gets driven. It's the engine by which players and the GM, any character, interacts with the world is in some way, shape, or form through the mechanics. So like you said, when and why and how you are rolling is incredibly important, and it's a huge stumbling block for the vast majority of games that we see out there on live plays, games that we've been involved in personally. And I think the biggest stumbling block is the overuse of skill rolls, skill checks. By far, that is the main mechanic which is being called for, it's being utilized, checked against, difficulty numbers are applied to. And using skills as a crutch, an overuse of skills as a crutch, is a huge reason why games either grind to a halt, you get out of character talk, you get players strategizing out of character, waffling in front of a door, in front of a corridor, before a boss room or something, which players are also using out of game knowledge. That's a separate matter. But I think you and I would agree, calling for skills should only be used when and if there is a dramatic consequence to either success or failure, or even degree of success or failure.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah, it's I think exactly what you're talking about. The overuse of the mechanics gets in the way of roleplay all the time, and it doesn't just bring the game to a halt. It just completely interrupts any sort of flow that you might be having, and does take you out of character. And like you said, there's definitely times to use skill checks. They're there for a reason, and you're absolutely right that this is when there is something of consequence that can happen. But I think what you're kind of talking about, and the biggest offender in particular that we've talked about previously, is both GM and player uses of the perception check, or whatever related check it's going to be in your game. The worst thing that is so annoying watching these live plays is when they enter a room and a character says, can I make a perception check to see if they can find something, as opposed to actually going through and role playing, saying, I'm looking around the room, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. It takes just any sense of tension or drama out immediately.
Yeah.
And the worst
or
thing
even
is,
worse, ask for a perception check and don't even say why.
Yeah.
Let alone, I'm searching for something.
Yeah. What do I notice? What are my senses telling me right now? It's like, and part of that I think might be on the GM's fault. If you're not setting the scene, at least, it's like you enter the room.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'd like to make a perception check. Okay, you succeeded. Now I'll tell you there's tapestries on the wall, and there's a bench with a table, and you can see that there's food left on it. It's like, no. Do that first.
Open with that.
Yeah, open with that. Describe the scene. Set the scene. Give us the mood. Give us a little pulse check on what's going on,
Yeah, exactly. And you'll see people ask, it's worse when it's like you describe, saying, can I make a perception? Of course you can.
Oh my God, I know.
Blind? Like, do you have eyes and are you living?
Yeah.
Of course you can. Can I walk into the room? Of course you can.
Yeah.
Don't ask permission for that.
Right. This is what Shauna refers to as Mother May I.
Mother May I.
Yeah, and it is
infuriating.
It's so annoying. It is so annoying. It's a sign that people just don't know how to role play, which is frustrating on its own. Like, I don't know how these people are getting into these games and not, like, I don't know how you just don't immediately pick this up. If your GM doesn't tell you, like, when you're like, okay, well, how do we play? It's like, okay, let's start playing. and tell me what you're going to do. Tell me what you do. And then you, as the player, tell the GM what you're doing.
What you do. Yeah, what a concept, right?
Yeah, it's not that
the
hard.
most stripped down. Yeah, do you know how to even play make-believe? Like, do you have any...
I know, this is the thing. It's like, how do you play? It's like you're playing pretend. You're playing pretend with more structure on it. That's what you're doing. That's what a role-playing game is.
Yes. Yeah, stripped down of everything. That's precisely what it is. And like you said, perception checks are the most overused skill in any iteration of any game. Perception or perception equivalent, a spot check, whatever you want to.
Yeah.
Whatever the game calls it.
It's also something that it is with the GM. It's a constant way of letting your poker face down and giving a tell. Is when give me a perception check. It's like, ooh, something's gonna happen.
It's so irritating.
Yeah, it's you're telegraphing that there's something interesting instead of setting a scene.
You're incentivizing out of character behavior.
Oh God, yeah.
When you call for that, like, do you really want to do that? Are you sure you don't want to? Shut up.
Yeah.
Just let the players do what they're going to do. Let them say, explain, describe what they're doing, what they're looking at, what they're engaging with, what actions they're taking, and key off of those things. And when you have players where you have a GM who's allowing or encouraging that type of behavior, you are breaking the flow. It takes a long time to get back, especially with these trash these trash groups. If you're able to get any kind of role play going, it's going to take you 45 minutes to get back into it. But even that aside, and it's amazing that this isn't explained more frequently. You should not hold every single meaningful or dramatic aspect of a scene behind a perception check, or even any skill check necessarily as such. Let's say you're investigating a room for something. You're in a manor house. Let's say it's a heist. It's a heist. You're in a manor house. You're looking for something you need to steal or retrieve, or this person is corrupt, and so you're trying to get dossiers.
Yeah, you're trying to get some sort of evidence, Yeah.
Right. Whatever it is, whatever you're looking for. Describe. You're in the room. You're in the scene. I'm the player. I'm portraying the character. I'm going to look at the bookcase. I'm going to look in the fireplace, in the hearth, in or about the hearth. Okay. Then maybe you ask for a perception check after the player describes, I'm rifling through all the books. I'm going through the desk. I'm looking at all the papers that are on there. I'm checking the drawers. I'm checking the drawers for false bottoms. Even if you're not doing that, even just saying, I'm looking at the desk, let's say, maybe you call for a perception check in that case at that point, because the player has explained what part of the room they've keyed off of your description.
Yeah.
Okay, you've described it's a Victorian study, right? Okay, we have a picture in our mind of what a Victorian study is, even though I may not have specifically described a writing desk, or I may not have described every single aspect, because you can't, right?
Yeah.
Players taking the initiative based on what I've described. They have an image in their mind. Here's a particular aspect of the scene I'm engaging with. Now, because we've already established this is a heist, so either you are breaking in here, you don't belong here, or you're trying to rifle through someplace you're not supposed to before someone else sees you or asks any questions about it. So there's a dramatic tension already there.
Right.
If this was your house or one of the other player characters' houses, you wouldn't need a perception check to find something. Just like you don't need an athletics check to cross your street to go get the mail.
Yeah.
You're always going to succeed if you have enough time and no one is stopping you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's a
yeah.
really good point, because the whole point of having the roll, and in every system you're going to have some sort of like difficulty rating or challenge rating or something that you're rolling against. And
Correct.
mentally, as the GM, if this is a low enough challenge rating that like it doesn't really even merit a roll, don't call for it.
No, do not call for it. Yeah, that's the overuse, and a lot. This is, like I said at the beginning, this is a crutch. Calling for rolls too often is a crutch from a. It's evidence of a poor GM who doesn't either have the confidence, hasn't done the work in terms of even thinking about what the scene is going to be or what the situation for the session is going to be about at all. And I think there's I couldn't even tell you exactly what apart from that is the cause here, but there's this crazy need to, okay, I say something, or the player says something, I ask for a roll.
Yeah.
I say something, you say something else, okay, immediately you ask for a roll. That's not, and there are some games who do specify this, like Chaosium, RuneQuest, Mithras. There are some systems which do have, usually in some sort of sidebar, only call for rolls when dramatically appropriate.
Right. And there's kind of two areas where I think a perception check is merited. The first, if you're doing this search of a room, and the whole point is that you've only got a few seconds, the person stepped out for a moment, and or they're being distracted, and you have to look really, really quickly. That's when I would say make a perception check,
Right.
Because there's something at stake, and like the consequences matter, and you don't have time to sit there and actually role play out what you're doing. If there's not time pressure, then that would be a time where the perception check is not merited. The second area where I think a perception check would be merited is, say the party is camped out in the middle of the woods, it's at night, and you're on watch or something like that. And as the GM, I know that there's an ambush about to happen, that there's someone sneaking up on the camp. That's when a perception check would matter, because there is some sort of drama and something at stake for the success or failure of that. But if you're on watch in the woods and you're doing some sort of other role played scene, you're talking, and there's nothing immediately going on unless the character says, I want to look around and do that. Let them do that, role play that out. That's fine. But you don't need to make a perception check if nothing's happening,
Correct. Yeah, just like you don't, there are 100,000 aspects of daily life which we don't bring the mechanics in for. You don't need to breathe. You don't need to make a respiratory check. You don't need to,
give me a bowel check. I need to know if you need to take a shit right now. This is
right. Yeah, to my mind, there are two things that need to be in effect for a skill check, a legitimate skill check to be called for.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, like you said, a stake, a dramatic stake, and an impediment to that check. In your example, even if the impediment isn't known to the players or to the characters in this moment, like your ambush, they don't necessarily know that there's an impediment, but there's a time impediment because there's this ambush is going to happen.
Yeah.
In X amount of time. It's going to happen soon.
Yeah.
So there's only a certain amount of time or the character might see the ambush before it actually happens.
Right.
In this room, in the study, this example, you have the stake, you have this thing you're looking for that's of value or of interest in the scene, and you have the stake of you don't want to make too much noise. You want to also do this in somewhat short order. You can't stay here for hours, to have a full blocked off crime scene investigation.
Yeah. This is something I just thought about too. There is because I was thinking, okay, what's another circumstance where a perception check actually sort of matters? And it's something where an actual skill would be being used. Like if you are doing some sort of forensic analysis, you're actually a crime scene investigator and you are actually investigating a crime scene. That is something that is a real set of technical skills that you have that you would, I think that would merit a roll. However, this idea of perception or awareness being a skill makes no sense to me. This is like it's not a skill. It's literally just your senses. Yeah.
Yes.
It's my literal awareness of my surroundings. So I don't think that if this is something that happens in your game where it is just reliant essentially on the senses of your characters, unless it's something like an ambush or unless it's, under time pressure, doesn't really need a roll. If it's something that does take a specific skill, and this is probably a problem with, the skill set in a given game. If perception is a skill, that's not a skill, in my opinion. You're just awareness of the world. That's not a skill.
Or at the very least, if there isn't an additional skill that covers a more specific or more technical implementation. My mind goes to Mithras. So Mithras has a first aid skill, but it also has a healing skill. And healing in that system is more of, an actual physician training rather than I patch you up. Anybody can put a bandage on a wound, but to set a bone, to remove an arrowhead, or to remove a bullet, or something that requires surgery or more, specific medical training.
Yeah.
And that's on the flip side of that. Let's say you're trying to crack a bank vault. Let's say this is, to keep with a more modern day heist situation.
Yeah.
And I don't even know how this would let's say somehow you're not under any time pressure. I don't know, this metaphor might be falling down.
Yeah.
But you're trying to break into this bank vault. But if you don't have the tools, don't make the roll. Or if you are trying to perform again, in a modern day setting.
Let me use I have safe cracking skills. Of course, I don't have my drill. I don't have, explosives or anything like that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put my ear to the safe and I'm going to turn the dial and I want to use my safe cracking skill. It's like that. No, that's not how it works.
It doesn't apply. You do not have, you may not have the skill and or you may not have the tools that are required for that skill.
Right.
No natural 20, no critical success.
I know. Oh my God.
Will break that door or will perform open heart surgery if you're on the side of the road. You may be the best heart surgeon in the world. If you're on the side of the road, you can't perform heart surgery. You need you need the tools.
And that's actually an excellent point, because in circumstances like this where it makes no sense, but you're still like, well, I have the healing skill. I have the medicine skill. I want to, use that skill on this person. It's like, you don't have any tools or anything like that. You shouldn't roll for that because there's nothing you can do. If there's nothing you could feasibly do, then you shouldn't do a roll for that. And if you do a roll for that and they get a natural 20 or something else, and it's like, what are they doing? Some sort of miraculous laying on of hands like a cleric? It makes no sense.
It makes no sense.
And don't put yourself and your players or your game in the position of critical success happening in a circumstance where it didn't make sense to make the roll in the first place, because you're breaking any sense of reality and verisimilitude when you do that.
Right. Yeah. So this over reliance on skill checks or mechanics in general is it really does, like you said, it erodes verisimilitude. So And also, if you have that training, you would know that
Yeah,
there's
that
nothing
I can't
there's
use my
nothing that
bare
could be
hands
done.
to pull shards of a bullet out of someone's still beating heart.
Right.
It makes no
It just
sense.
doesn't work, and your character would know that. So let the scene ride.
Right.
Let the drama come forth from that.
And this in
So
and on the flip side of this is in systems where you do have like healing magic, or you literally can lay your hands on someone and heal them. Totally different. Make the roll for that, because that actually makes sense within the world
correct.
on its own terms. Like, you preserve some sense of reality that way. That's totally fine if it's in line with the actual spirit of the world. Yes, make your roll, do it, whatever. But if there's any sense of like gritty realism to these things, that sort of a situation, like, let the person die. Try your best
Right.
to stop the bleeding, do whatever. But if it's like, if you have gotten yourself into a dangerous situation where someone is grievously wounded, there might not be anything that you can do. And guess what? That makes the game more interesting.
Yeah.
You can't always succeed every single time in every single circumstance. The answer
Yeah.
is not always on your character sheet. And this, again, like, these bad habits destroy people's role play, because if you do what we do, which is our rule 0 is committing to intention and role play, you save yourself from getting into these situations in the first place, because you're actually trying to, portray what a person would do, a real person.
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of this, I think it comes down to, I guess there's a few things. I know I've met GMs out there who, for whatever reason, they don't have well, first of all, they don't have the imagination, right? So
Yeah.
that's a big reason. The skill check is a crutch to obfuscate the fact that
Yeah.
you can't keep the scene going on the fly. Let me make a skill check, even though
Skill check,
the
buy some
result-
time so I can think of something.
skill check buy some time, even though it either doesn't make sense to make this skill check, or this skill check is just wasting time.
Yeah, I mean, and I've done
a-
this in the past.
It's an athletics check, it's a perception check that has no stakes or has no there's nothing to be found here.
Yeah, or it's
Right? But I'm
it's
calling for it anyway.
nonsensical. And to be clear, like, I've done this in the past, in
Yeah.
ages past, when I was less experienced as a GM. It's doing things like doing a skill check because it seems appropriate. Oh, well, they're searching for something. Let's do a perception check. And then, you're like,
Right.
okay, well, what did they find? It's like, well, you're in the same position you were 10
Yeah,
seconds ago.
you dig the hole deeper.
Yeah, you didn't solve the problem. You didn't make the game
Yeah.
better. This didn't, it's. I think that there is an element of mystique when the GM is calling for rolls on things, and there's been
Right.
times, where I've done this where I think it actually worked, where you have players make rolls for something that might be important later on in the game. Like, if some specific thing is going to happen, or something may be happening at the moment, where they need to make a roll, but the consequences won't be felt until hours later. You can make some rolls, and this is going to kind of telegraph something weird is going on, and then it'll come back to them at a different point. I think you can do that, but it's so easy to fall into the trap of relying on that and relying on the dice to provide this sense of tension, instead of providing a sense of tension through role play and through the game and the description and the interactions with the characters and interaction with the environment. So I think that's a really, really bad habit and a trap that just makes your game blow.
Yeah. The dice, the mechanics always should be serving the role play in the scene,
Yeah.
and it shouldn't be the other way around. I can't think of anything. Let me ask for a check because I don't know what to do, and maybe something interesting will happen on
Right.
with the dice. It's going to be either a a crippling failure, maybe it'll be a great success, and so I'll come up with something in the moment, even though it doesn't make
Yeah.
any sense. And now, because
now
I
that's-
didn't have any,
Now that something cool happened, I did that. That was me, you know.
yeah, I did that.
It's a huge crutch. Again, not only that the GMs use, but if you've trained your players to say, "Can I do this?" You know, it's like they're trying to prompt something interesting to happen in the game
exactly. Yeah, yeah. Or they're
instead of doing something interesting.
yeah, and a lot of this. So from the player's side of things, a lot of this tendency comes from experience with antagonistic GMs, which is a different GM pitfall.
Yeah.
You want to be realistic and uncompromising when you're putting forth the world, but you know the a lot of players are expecting the caricature of a GM who's going to spring a trap on you,
Yeah.
or something in a dungeon or whatever, and it's like, well, you didn't check the square in front of you before you moved 5 feet up,
Right.
and so the fireball trap happened. Make a new character.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a whole different level of like trash gaming groups, which we'll talk about at a different time. But
definitely do an episode on dungeons and dungeon crawls.
yeah.
Because I know it's something that everyone really loves, especially kind of in the OSR space that we're kind of looking into, and we're popping into their feeds now. I really don't like dungeon crawls.
I don't either.
They are, I think, they're gamey in the way that I don't like these things being known as games. I don't want to get too far off on that topic, because I think that's an episode topic.
It'll be another topic for another time. But it's also a big contributing factor to the overuse. Or one of the things I hate the most, and I alluded to it at the beginning of the episode, is out of character and drawn out of character strategizing.
Yeah. Oh,
you know,
God.
I'm going to use this skill, and then I'm going to use this skill, and then
I'm going to exhaust every mechanical option that I possibly can think of before I act and do something.
Yeah, a complete inversion of what actually should be happening. And we're picking a lot on perception, because I think it's by far the biggest offender.
Yes.
But you know, I've been in games, and I've seen games where you're in either a fantasy game or a modern day game. You get in a carriage, or you get into a car, or you get into a boat. Okay, make me a drive roll. Make me a ride check. Car is not going to break down. You know, you're playing a vampire game, or you're playing a modern day game. If you're going from, you know, downtown to somewhere else in the city, if nothing else happens, you're going to make it.
Yeah.
If you're getting into a boat or a carriage, and you're going to a different destination, and that's all that's going on, you don't need to make the roll.
Yeah.
It just bogs things down.
Yeah.
And it slams the doors on the role play, on the flow of the scene. Now, if something happens during the travel, or if you know that someone has rigged the car to explode, or something has happened, that's something else.
Yeah, it's actually,
that would be perhaps appropriate.
Right. And on the topic of driving as a skill, this is something that I found so pointless to use in games. When I was running World of Darkness and Vampire, I would tell everyone, I would just ask them during character creation, does your character know how to drive? They said, yeah. I'd say, okay, you get 2 dots in drive. Because that's that means that you are competent at operating a vehicle. Those rules works on a rating of 1 to 5. 0 being completely untrained, you're going to be doing things at a big disadvantage, like negative bonus essentially to your rolls. one means you are basically totally incompetent, but you have some level of skill. Two is like the average human can do this.
Yeah.
Three, you are highly, highly skilled at something. Four, you're going to be, you could professionally train people to do things. And five, you're literally like the peak of human ability in this thing. And so a drive roll was never made in my games because we didn't get into any car chases. If there was a car chase, maybe some drive rolls would have been involved.
Yep.
But it's a completely pointless and stupid stat to have burning up any of your points and character creation. But to think that you need to do this is like, I get on the bike and I start riding down the street. Well, it's like, well, do you know how to ride a bike?
Yeah, it's absurd.
It's so stupid. It's so
so
stupid.
dumb. Yeah, it's dumb to think about it that way, and it's just as dumb to actually call for a roll in the scene, in play, for something about this. Like you said, only if there's a chase or if the players are trying to get... something's happening on the other side of the city. I'm going to jump on the freeway and I'm just going to I'm going to fucking book it. I'm going to put pedal to the metal. I'm going to run red lights.
I'm going to do something dangerous.
That's when a drive roll is called.
Exactly.
Yes. I'm going to do something dangerous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to do something where there's something at stake. The chance of success or failure matters.
Yeah.
And
there's all these impediments, all these other vehicles on the road.
Yeah. There's police officers that may not like what you're doing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So dumb. It's so irritating, and it's really frustrating finding out that there are people who operate their games in the opposite direction. These trash GMs. But I definitely think that and this is, for instance, something we'll talk about a little bit later in the episode. But this is not, by the way, rule of cool. This is not rule of cool at all. This is like rule of, basic competence, rule of, what could people actually do? You don't have to roll to, pick up your fork and eat. You don't have to roll to get in a car and drive. You'd have to roll to ride a horse, because that actually does take skill. And if you don't know what you're doing, you can die. Like that's legitimately, unless you're playing like some sort of Western game and, horse riding, like the basics of riding a horse, are something that your character would know. But if you're playing in an urban setting in the modern day and your character has never seen a horse in real life, let alone gotten on top of one, that's a time to make a roll, But the idea that you should be leaning on the mechanics in this way to advance your game, to make something happen, is something that if you're doing that, you really need to stop and reevaluate it, because you are killing your game. You are killing the atmosphere, you're killing the flow, and you're destroying any opportunity for actual role play. The things that drive a game are the characters and the action and the dialogue you're having. Combat obviously drives a game forward if that's happening. Things where it's happening, where things are at stake, that's when you make rolls.
Right. The dice are there to provide resolution and to add additional drama to dramatic actions that the characters have already taken,
and to adjudicate these things in a semi-objective manner, where it's not just the whims of the GM or the whims of the player,
Yeah, and something you had said earlier takes my mind back. If you're running a game, you should have some degree of awareness. We've talked about genre before, right? So different genres have a different perspective or a different approach to certain actions, and that's the case with certain systems. There are some systems that are designed, particularly in their skill aspect, to be either more typically more or less favorable to like player successes. A game like Savage Worlds, let's say, has a more pulpy feel. There's a greater likelihood, or a greater, you can more frequently expect at least some kind of marginal success. If you're playing a percentile based system, particularly if it's the first you know first dozen sessions of a Call of Cthulhu game, or a Mithras game, or a RuneQuest game, or any D100 skill-based system, it's not likely that a character is going to have many skills, or possibly any skill, that's above 40-50%.
Yeah.
So have an understanding and have that awareness as the GM inform how and when and why you're making skill checks. Because if you know that most of the characters have a skill rating from 11 to 43% on most things, that informs a particular way in which the drama is going to take place, right? You're generally not going to succeed. So
Yeah.
don't have the approach, don't try and run a pulp game, right? Through, with that kind of a skill set. We've said before that system does matter. I think that's pretty definitively defined at this point. So all of these things you should be thinking about, you should have an awareness of, and don't just bog the game down every 3 minutes, every 10 minutes, asking for another check.
Yeah.
It's not going to help you. It's not going to, you shouldn't be thinking about padding out your game, but even if you do, it's not going to do so successfully.
Yeah, seriously. And I think this is actually a good moment to go on to the next part of, if you are doing checks under some circumstances and there is something at stake, should you, as a GM, or certainly as a player, fudge your rolls?
Hell no.
Hell no. Ever.
Hell no.
Ever.
No.
It is so stupid and abominable to have the dice and know that they're there to resolve these situations. And then when you roll and it doesn't go in the direction that you want it to,
why did you bother rolling?
Why did you bother?
Yeah.
What were the dice there for in the first place?
This?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think
exactly.
on the obvious situation here, where this is a hard no, because I think there are people who disagree with this. This was a topic a few days ago on Twitter, where normies and Giga Chads were arguing about this. First, I think everyone can generally agree that players should not fudge their rolls. That's simply just cheating.
Yeah.
It's literally cheating. And
ask anyone around your table. That would, I think you'd get a unanimous, one of the few situations where you get a unanimous response from your players.
Yeah. It's so that I think is just despicable and stupid. And if
nobody likes that, nobody wants that.
You can't do that in other games, that's you'll get kicked out. And you probably, if you're doing that,
called rules.
Yeah. If you're doing that in an RPG as a player, you probably should get kicked out of the group.
Yeah,
because definitely. You're ruining any sense of fairness or anything in the game. Like you're
right.
This it shouldn't even really need to be said. The place where it gets gray for people here, those with GMs, fudging rolls.
Yeah.
And I really, really don't think there is a circumstance where you should ever fudge a roll as a DM or a GM.
Yeah, I agree. And it's interesting. I was watching the discussion as well, and there are a number of people who are coming at this from like a fairness perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely, I agree with that, although from my perspective, I'm far less. The issue of fairness is less of a concern for me
Yeah.
personally. What I'm most opposed to about it is you're eroding the verisimilitude. You're
Yeah.
eroding the dramatic integrity of the world. It isn't even so much, at least from my perspective, that you're, from the GM perspective, that you're, I don't know, cheating and you're robbing me of some degree of objectivity. Here, what I hate more than that is you're you're killing the world.
Yeah.
So I've invested my time and my energy and my role play intention in this world with the understanding that things are going, causes are going to have effects
Yes.
as, realistically as, we can imagine them.
Yeah.
And then you're sort of betraying my effort here and my investment in this world and this time that we're spending together. That is what's most infuriating to me.
Yeah, no, I pretty much agree with that. It's you are breaking, and for me, it's like you're breaking the verisimilitude. It will feel false because it is false.
It is,
if
yeah.
we're objectively cheating, even if you're not showing this to your players, because a lot of people, they roll behind a GM screen or whatever, and a roll comes up and they don't like the result, they change it, and the players might not even be the wiser about it. But you're robbing them of consequences. And the whole point of these games, not the whole point, but one of the great things about these games is that you do get to have consequences from your actions. And if you don't have
Right.
consequences from your actions, your character doesn't actually have any agency. You are, in a sense, just rolling along with the GM's novel because this is the outcome that
Yeah.
they want. And the idea that
Yeah.
you're going to be, because I can already hear the soy jacks reeing about this, is that, if the players have gotten to this huge point in the story, a boss fight, for instance, and they're having this titanic struggle against this demon or whatever it is, and then the
Right.
demon, has a critical hit and just absolutely wrecks one of the players.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, that's not fun. If, the characters invested all this time, it's not fun if they die. And it's like, first of all, yes, it is. I've had
Yeah.
this happen many times in my games where a titanic battle is happening and someone dies. One of the player characters dies.
Yeah.
And I guarantee you, when that happens, if you're not playing with like people watching
Trash.
Muppet Babies, people who
Yeah.
have some sense of liking, drama to happen.
Yeah.
When a character dies, that's like the most memorable session. Like
I've
that's
been the player. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've been the character who's died, and it's awesome.
it's so fun. It's so
Yeah.
cool because like holy shit, like your heart's going because you don't want your character to die. There is something at stake, and if you are
Yeah.
perpetually altering that role, you are robbing someone of the cool experience of having failure, and that's one of the cool things, like one of the most fun things in these games. For a small sidebar on this, I remember when I was a kid, I used to play Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2 religiously all the time.
Great game. Buddy.
Yeah, and eventually my brother and I figured out the cheat codes and got God mode on, and I went through and I played that game a million times on God mode, and just I got really, really bored. And then one day I loaded up and I forgot to put in the cheat code, and all of a sudden I'm taking damage, and like I was like, oh, like I got excited again because I was like,
Yeah.
oh wow, yeah, this is hard, this is a challenge, and the game became much, much better. Yeah, so you're robbing people of that, but even from just a kind of a storytelling aspect, you're making this a very boring world if nobody can die.
Yeah.
Very, very boring. It's like, imagine
Yeah.
in Game of Thrones if Ned Stark rolled out of the way.
Lived.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and they didn't chop his head off. That story would be fucking stupid. If
Yeah.
any number of those characters that died, like very ignoble deaths, if they survived those things, the show would have been boring. The reason it was interesting was because you had characters that you were invested in that got totally mogged.
Yeah, and a huge part of that whole saga are the direct results of Ned Stark's death.
Yeah, exactly. It kicks off the
snowballed
story.
a huge number of complications and problems.
Yeah. Interesting
Um,
stories and interesting things to engage in.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And go ahead.
I was going to say, this I don't even know what you would call it. This reliance or this false assumption that story beats as such and dramatic sort of climax and denouement and these storytelling aspects, this belief that they're relevant in at least in a primary way for a role-playing game is a misunderstanding of what the activity is.
Oh yeah, totally.
Because you can't, if you're telling a story, if you want to have a dramatic payoff and then rising action and falling action, and you want that to be consistent in a way that a story, a book or a movie or a TV show might be, you have to take complete control of everything from the get-go, right? You can't let the players have any meaningful choice, let alone this boss fight.
Yeah.
Let's say, right? Because if you need to have the boss take the fall, on in the 6th round,
yeah.
let's say, and if you're going to die on that hill, okay, well, let's turn the clock back. You needed to make the player characters be here in this moment, in this situation,
yeah.
to have the fight in the first place for the boss to go down in the 6th round.
Yeah.
It's going to incentivize, and it's going to, you as a GM, encourage bad behavior. It's not just ruining the scene, it's ruining future games,
and it's poisoning
as well.
It's poisoning the entire activity in the same way that this analogy you're using of the boss going down in the 6th round. What you are doing as the GM is you're fixing the boxing match.
Yeah.
You have paid off the boss to take a fall at that point, and everybody universally hates that. They don't want to see a match between two people where one has agreed to take the fall, if it's an actual, contest. Obviously, professional wrestling, totally different, because that is a performance and is not an actual, battle going on. But any combat sport, if someone's paid off and they go down, like, that's so horrible. Nobody wants that.
It's such a letdown.
Yeah, nobody wants that. And you're doing that to your players. You are completely robbing them of the chance to actually achieve victory or actually experience failure. Both are really pretty interesting. And here's the thing. If you do end up with a total party kill and you're playing some high fantasy game where the stakes are like, no, the world's going to end if this happens, well, guess what? You get that total party kill. Roll with the consequences of it. Say, okay,
absolutely.
Season 2 of the game has just started. Make some new characters. This is the aftermath of your failure. Mm-hmm. And if you want a great example of this, I fucking did that on this channel. I did that.
Yep.
I didn't intentionally go into the session planning on killing everyone, but I may have had the Conan soundtrack on and things happened. But we started up. Yeah, but we continued that story with the world having advanced after this epic failure of theirs. And of course, the game fell apart because of scheduling conflicts and all of that always happens.
Right.
But if you want to give your players like an incredible experience, then their actions have to actually mean something. And for their actions to mean something, there has to be consequences and something at stake. And if you fudge your fucking dice, you're a shit GM and you're ruining and poisoning the entire experience.
Yeah, and it just goes to show that you don't have any imagination. You can't roll with the punches, whether it is the case that you're fudging the die rolls to prevent a player or multiple players from going down in an encounter, let's say, or from, again, let's go back to the heist example at the beginning. Don't fudge the results to maybe the players all get found out and they go to fucking prison.
Yeah.
Or they go to the gallows, and that's it. Whatever the situation might be. Or if it could be the case that your boss goes down in round 2 because
that's
2
the
people
other
got
thing.
a crit, and there's like,
right,
you gotta roll with it.
Yeah, that happens too, and I know it's disappointing if your fucking thing that you think is going to be the biggest challenge ever just gets absolutely trashed. You got to roll with that, because again, that's something that the players did, and you're robbing them of that victory and that agency. And honestly, it does end up usually propelling a much more compelling narrative in a direction that you didn't expect, and that's what's cool about role-playing games.
Yeah, if you're fudging your dice either for or against the players, you're almost certainly, it's like we talked about last episode, the issue of railroading versus freeform or sandbox. You have you're too tightly grasping the steering wheel.
Right.
You need to let go, and you need to take a wider perspective on the world and on the campaign that you're running here.
Yeah,
because something happens that you didn't intend, even if it is, or it was intended to be, very climactic, or a linchpin circumstance.
Yeah.
The world never stops.
You're 100% right that this is another way in which you get your game on the rails. Like, this is absolutely, because you have come up with a predetermined outcome, and this is not the way. This is not the way, my friend. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting. You feel like 99 times out of 100, the dice fudging is to prevent someone from dying.
Yeah.
Either the players or a GM.
Yeah.
You're going to the boss. I hate the word boss, but the boss. The boss is has as many hit points as as he needs to until I want him to take the fall.
Yeah.
Right. That's not how you should be doing things. And similarly, let's say, this, we keep using the example of some sort of combat encounter. But it paints the picture very, very well.
Yeah, because I think this is where most of the time die fudging happens.
I think you're right.
Like, I don't think that people are generally fudging perception checks and things like that. I think it's because generally combat has the highest stakes because the players' lives are in danger.
Yeah, it is also the case that I think we've alluded to, maybe in episode 1, there is an aspect in which, for every game that is at least coming to mind, there's the roleplay portion of the game, and then there's the combat portion of the game, and the combat portion of the game really is its own separate activity, and that is something where it's a common complaint, and an accurate complaint, that combats grind things to a halt, or they go on forever, because every single moment, every couple of seconds, a die roll is being called for and interpreted. Right? And so it really does grind things to a halt. And it also, you have that much mechanical interface happening so rapidly in such a condensed amount of time.
Yeah, and this is
I
this
think
is a
it brings about the worst tendencies. And if I think your failings or your weaknesses as a GM and as a player are going to manifest most strongly, and possibly maybe not all the time, but at least a large amount of the time, first and most prominently in a combat situation.
yeah, and this is also why you need to choose good systems. I think this is
Yeah.
a problem with D&D across many editions. It's not just
Yeah.
5e. 4e apparently
Yeah.
was even worse about this because it was like everything was like powers and feats and all this stuff. But even 3.5 got very complicated. Second edition got complicated at some point. Well, I mean, it started out complicated, but it got complicated in different ways by the end of it. But when you have these super complicated skill and ability trees that give you all of these different options that you can exhaust over time, and they, especially when you bring in multiple actions into a game, multiple actions grind things to a halt. I think I tweeted about this on our Twitter the other day, because it's like you look at like Vampire the Masquerade, you know, the use of celerity. Once people have, you know, your characters are like mid-level, or they're getting, you know, they're elders, especially if multiple people have celerity in a combat. If one person has celerity in a combat, multiple dots of it, like you end up getting 3-4 actions per person. And the antagonists have to have this as well, because if they don't, you're just going to completely annihilate them. It's the type of thing, like I was talking to my friend Matt, who got me into Vampire, about this the other day. And it's the type of thing where like 13 or 14 actions happen in one combat round. And everyone's dead. You know, the combat ends in 1 or 2 rounds. And it's like, this was a 10-second fight with people moving at light speed. You know, it's just this like flurry of blood and everything like that.
Yeah.
But it took 3 hours. It took 3 fucking hours to resolve. It's awful. So this is, I think, where the complexity of the mechanics in a lot of games really, really screws things up. And you want to give interesting abilities and things like that, but it is a catastrophically bad decision, game design decision, in my opinion, to have multiple actions or just way, way too complicated skill trees. And that's, I think a lot of that, it's not just that it's come from video games, but it's been definitely embedded in video games for a long, long time. And those have influenced people making games.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely made it worse in a lot of examples. Not all of them, but in a large number of different systems and in different editions of certain systems.
But it's something that I mean, like, even normies complain about with D&D 5e. They say, you know, it's like by the time you get to like 6th or 7th level, you know, things are combat really does slow down and grind to a halt, just because there's just so many things you can do, and it takes a lot of the drama out of it. And so it's, if you have a simpler system, where even if you have multiple attacks, it's like it's a single roll for each attack, resolve it. You know, it's not I'm now doing this and I'm now doing that. It's just, it makes things terrible, because then at that point,
what this is,
at that point, you're rolling dice too much, and it's because the mechanics are, you know, something is at stake, but the mechanics are doing this in a way that is hindering the actual game.
Right, that's exactly what I was going to say. This is these overburdened combat systems, which is most of them, are examples of the game designer not remembering this rule, which sometimes, you know, in some cases they put elsewhere in their own books earlier in the skill section, where it's only interface with the mechanics when it is dramatically relevant, right? So you have like system overload, you know, an overloaded interface with the mechanics in, you know, combat time, in round time, and that's, you know, that combat is a whole separate issue as well, which we have to do an episode on at some point,
Yeah,
because
for sure.
there's a massive number of problems that spawn from combat systems, combat time, combat
Yeah.
mechanics, an overabundance of all of the mechanics just being about combat.
Oh God, I know. There's and just abilities in general, because that's like we've talked about this offline, but one of my favorite games of all time is Exalted by White Wolf, and that's a game where again, like you have multiple actions in certain skill trees or whatever, but there's so many different powers, and they're really cool and they're a lot of fun to use and implement, but it almost requires you to be looking up rules all the time. And then that was like second edition, which was known as being really clunky. Then they made third edition, and it's like, I don't know, fucking 350 pages of powers. Like it's crazy. It's too much. You can't,
Yeah.
and you as a game master, you can't absorb all of that,
No.
and know at least the basics of it on the fly. It's just, it's terrible. But I think we're pretty much at time right now, and I think we could definitely continue talking about this topic considerably
sure.
longer, but I think it's probably a pretty good place to wrap up.
Agreed. I think like the case we've made is clear. I think if you want your game to be better, or if you're running into these problems, even occasionally, I think 9 times out of 10 the answer is going to be let go or loosen your grip on the steering wheel, whether you're the GM or you're the player. Just back off a little bit and interface with the mechanics less frequently.
Yeah. Only when
Only
necessary.
approach when it's dramatically needed.
Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah, well,
Agreed.
I think this has been a pretty good discussion. I feel like we're kind of firing on all cylinders there. So
Yeah, man.
I think this episode, we're not going to screw it up. Remember, no apologies, no compromises.
No compromises.